That was actually a real gag. Ironic.
A study showed that nearly 60% of men and 40% of women struggled with the phobia. The study was a decade old, but I tell you what, I was on the bus halfway to work a couple of weeks ago. I left my phone at home, Polly. I got another bus back because I couldn't handle being without my phone for the whole day.
You're addicted.
Either of you willing to admit suffering from this?
This is actually an intervention. Look, I mean, I have some days where, I jump on the train and I'm like, damn, I needed it because I know that people are going to be calling me. But I actually do try and have days where, I'm also a costume designer, where I'm in the studio and I will pick up the phone, check my messages, turn it off, and then I won't pick it up till lunchtime, check messages, do what I need to do, turn it off, and then do again at 5 o'clock. But that takes a lot of practice. And I have friends who, they'll be sitting there, say we're in the dressing room about to go on for a show, and I'm like, oh, did you see on the news? And you're talking to this person, and they go, oh, sorry, what?
Yeah,
because they weren't present. They were too busy working on, doing on their phone. And I've bumped into people walking down the street because they've seen that I'm coming, but they, their eyes down on the phone.
The best way to do it is not have your phone on you. If I have my phone on, I will check. Because it's just a Pavlovian response. If I see someone else check the phone, they've done service, and this, you'll check your phone. For my 50th birthday, we went to Hawaii, and there's no use for it there. And I had like 7 days with virtually no phone use. And I was really happy that I slipped back into not having it. Because you're probably old enough to remember Wallace. I'm not sure how old you are. But we used to go out. Remember this? We used to go out, arrange like on the phone at home, the plastic thing that was stuck on the wall, or on a little glass table
the
in Nan's house. We would ring someone up, agree to meet them at a certain place at a certain time, and then just go there. And if they weren't there, well, you just made do. Do you remember that? And I know there'll be a certain generation of people listening to this going, "Whoa, what crazy times were these? How long ago?"
I've got a memory right now of being in Nelson, phoning a friend saying, "I'll meet you outside the State Theatre near the red telephone box at 15 past 2 p.m. in 2 Saturdays' time."
And they did it.
And you had to be there. You couldn't, Polly. You couldn't. Those days you couldn't cancel.
Right.
You couldn't cancel.
I mean, I remember my mum saying, just go and play with your friends and just, come home when the streetlights turn on. And you would. And you didn't have, well, I couldn't get hold of you. You didn't have your phone on. Oh.
Do you know?
And our parents just go nuts because their kids, need a mobile phone because they need to know where they are like every second.
No, you actually don't. It's actually added to a whole lot of hovering parent type, attitudes. And we do the same thing. I'm as guilty of it as anybody. But you know what? You actually may do. It was all right. You got through your life, you got through your childhood okay, and you were actually probably better for it. I mean, I remember the times when I'm old enough to remember we actually were a little bit in the country out of Auckland and a party line. So you could pick up the phone and someone else was having a conversation and you had to wait until they'd finished theirs before you could ring up.
I want to ask you, both of you as performers, this is part of life now. Don't the two of you just need to get to grips with the modern world? So, for example, if you're doing a drag performance, Polly, and you've got people there looking at the phone,
which is happening more and more and more, and I normally just stamp on the table and go, "Look at me," and that normally works.
I do the same thing as stand up in the same voice. It's kind of odd.
You just call people out on it.
I used to get upset. It's so prevalent now. I just can't even be bothered.
Got to go with it. Yeah.
Well, there you go. Very, very good. And so you're performing tonight, Polly?
Tonight at the Sound Shell in Wellington, 8 p.m.
There you go.
You've been an absolute delight, both of you. Andrew Clay, Polly Fuller, thank you for your time.
Happy birthday, Auckland.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're back, the first show of 2019. I'm Lisa Owen. On tonight's program, the KiwiBuild clash continues after it's revealed former boss Stephen Barclay was at the centre of an employment investigation when he resigned. Barclay says he was on track to reach government targets. Mercury rising will have the record-breaking numbers around the country and the latest fire and water warnings. And if you think it's hot, spare a thought for the bats in South Australia. They're dropping from heat stress. Are you over the school holidays yet? Juggling childcare and the cost of keeping your kids amused? Shall we cut a few weeks off the summer break?
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Paul Brennan. The former head of KiwiBuild, Stephen Barclay, is pursuing legal action against the government, saying he felt he had no choice but to resign. The Ministry of Housing issued a statement this afternoon saying Mr Barclay quit in January during an investigation into complaints about his behaviour. Here's our political reporter, Craig McCulloch.
The Ministry's Chief Executive, Andrew Crisp, says he launched an investigation following complaints by staff and stakeholders about Mr Barclay's treatment of others. He says Mr Barclay quit during that investigation and did not receive any exit payment. Stephen Barclay has hit back, saying he's extremely disappointed the Ministry has breached his privacy. He says there were complaints about his direct management style, which he requested be independently investigated. Mr Barclay says instead he was suspended for more than 2 months, making his position untenable and leading him to resign. He's now pursuing a case of constructive dismissal. From Parliament, Craig McCulloch.
Napier and Woodburn near Blenheim have recorded the hottest temperatures in the country today. Temperatures peaked at 35 degrees at about 4 o'clock before a sea breeze kicked in and cooled both areas down to the high 20s. Katie Todd reports.
A 157-year temperature record has already been broken in the Nelson region, with the overnight temperature in Richmond not falling below 24.3 degrees. It's a new all-time overnight temperature record for the country. And Met Service says it's still possible other record-breaking temperatures will be recorded in this week's heatwave. It has predicted the hottest temperatures will be in eastern areas. Fire officials say the fire danger is particularly high in Northland, Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, and many districts have total fire bans. Ko Katie Todd, Tēnei.
An Auckland public health expert says policy inertia is behind a lack of progress worldwide on reducing obesity. Boyd Swinburne is a co-chair of a major new report commissioned by the Lancet Medical Journal, which was released internationally today. It focuses on what it describes as 3 related pandemics: obesity, malnutrition and climate change. On obesity, Professor Swinburne says progress is patchy and an unwillingness to put policies into practice means no country has successfully reversed it yet.
Either because of very strong industry opposition, which is common for obesity and climate change, or because politicians are reluctant to implement those recommended policies because they're calling for regulation and taxation and so on, and politicians are reluctant to do that battle with big industries.
Boyd Swinburne says public support for policies that address obesity has been relatively quiet. Labour inspectors believe there are probably hundreds of cases of migrant workers being exploited in the hospitality sector. In 2 decisions, the Employment Relations Authority has fined a Hawke's Bay restaurant and an Auckland flooring company for flouting the rules. In the Napier case, Golden Spring Takeaway made 2 migrant staff work long hours, 7 days a week, with no days off for more than 6 months. The National Manager of the Labour Inspectorate, Stu Lumsden, says the hospitality sector is a serious problem spot, but he says some people being exploited don't want to come forward.
People don't understand what their rights are within New Zealand, may not necessarily trust authorities to deal with their case, and alternately they are also concerned around losing their visa status.
Stu Lumsden says fines are the most common way to punish businesses. Local officials are accusing the Brazilian mining company Vale of carelessness and incompetence after a deadly dam collapse at one of its iron ore mines in the country's southeast. The death toll has risen to 58, but more than 300 remain unaccounted for. The BBC's Julia Canero has more from the scene.
Rescue and recovery operations continue in Brumadinho, with firefighters struggling to reach areas inaccessible on foot, at times crawling over soft mud to progress through the sea of sludge left from the dam collapse. A spokesman for the fire department says emergency workers still haven't managed to reach some of the worst affected areas, such as the cafeteria of the mining complex where many workers were having lunch when the dam collapsed.
Julia Canero in Brumadinho. Venezuela's opposition leader Juan Guaido has called for mass protests later this week to demand fresh elections. Mr Guaido declared himself the country's interim president last week and is supported by a number of countries, including the US, Britain, France and Australia. The president, Nicolas Maduro, remains defiant and has urged soldiers to be ready to defeat what he called an imperialist coup attempt. Mr Guaido is warning the army not to intervene. The US has already warned Nicolas Maduro that any violence or intimidation against American diplomats or Mr Guaido will be met with a significant response. A Hapu representative is demanding a permanent fix for sewage spills into the Vanuatu stream in New Plymouth. The Taranaki Regional Council says it's been dealing with a significant discharge from a District Council sewage pumping station, which residents say turned the stream white last week. Glenn Skipper is on the Ngāti Kaikoura Hapu board and a member of Puketapu Hapu, both of which share a border on the Vanuatu stream. He says sewage spills are common.
Every other month we're getting notifications that there's a failure and that there's a spillage coming from the council. It's just disgusting.
Glenn Skipper says the Regional Council needs to take a tougher line with the New Plymouth District Council. The Taranaki Regional Council confirms there have been several sewage spills involving the Vanuatu stream in the past 5 days, none of which led to enforcement action. The superhero movie Black Panther has won the top award from Hollywood Screen Actors Guild, boosting its chances in this year's Oscars race. The film, which has been heralded for its predominantly black cast and celebration of African culture, was a surprise win over the favourite A Star Is Born. Glenn Close won Best Film Actress for playing a devoted spouse in The Wife, and Rami Malek won Best Actor for his portrayal of the late lead singer of Queen, Freddie Mercury, in Bohemian Rhapsody. And in sport, the New Zealand batsmen are finding it tough going in the third one-day cricket international against India in Maunganui. Trailing the tourists 2-0 in the 5-match series, the home side need to win today's game if they're to have any chance of taking the series. A short time ago, they were 113 for 3 after 27 overs. After New Zealand won the toss and opted to bat, the openers Martin Guptill and Colin Munro didn't last long, making 13 and 7 respectively. Skipper Kane Williamson was the third wicket to fall out of 28, seemingly frustrated by the lack of pace in the pitch. Ross Taylor is now on 35 and Tom Latham on 26. The world tennis number one Novak Djokovic has Roger Federer's all-time Grand Slam tennis haul in his sights. He's now outright third on the leaderboard after his Australian Open win gave him 15 Grand Slams, just 2 behind Rafael Nadal, while Federer is 5 ahead of him on 20. Jovac says he's motivated by creating history.
I do want to definitely focus myself on continuing to improve my game and maintaining the overall well-being that I have, so I would be able to compete at such a high level for the years to come and have a shot at getting closer to Roger's record.
The win at Melbourne Park also gave Djokovic his third straight Grand Slam title after winning at Wimbledon and the US Open. In English FA Cup fourth round games, Chelsea has beaten Sheffield Wednesday 3-0 and Crystal Palace beat Tottenham 2-0. That's the news.
John Tamahere defends his record as he takes a tilt at the Auckland Mayoralty.
Here's the thing, my name's JT, not JC. I make mistakes. I was indicated I own them. What do you want me to do, jump off Harbour Bridge?
A new type of Green Party is mooted.
And I think it's really, really important that it isn't a kind of an astroturf project.
And New Zealand prepares for the heat.
We go swimming all day, lots of swimming.
Diving into the issues of the day, Morning Reports, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, veteran emergency room doctor Jeremy Brown on how the flu is still one of our most deadly foes. And after 10, Harvard healthcare policy professor Ronald C. Kessler on the social determinants of mental health. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Reports on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service through to midnight tomorrow Tuesday. For all of the North Island, it'll be mainly fine and hot inland. However, areas of cloud, especially morning and night, and isolated showers about the Central Plateau late tomorrow afternoon and evening. Nelson, fine and hot. Buller, Westland and Fiordland, cloudy periods today. A few showers, fine and hot inland tomorrow. Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland, generally fine and hot inland, but cloudy periods about the coast, mainly morning and night. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy at times, possible drizzle tomorrow morning. It's 8 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Paul. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National and I'm Lisa Owen. A spat between the former head of KiwiBuild, Stephen Barclay, and his old boss is playing out on a very public stage. The Ministry of Housing and Urban Development has issued a statement this afternoon revealing Mr Barclay quit during an investigation into complaints about his behaviour. But Stephen Barclay's hit back, revealing he's pursuing legal action against the government. Our political reporter Craig McCulloch joins us now. Hi Craig, what's the ministry saying about this?
Good afternoon. Yes, well, for a moment it looked like we might have some clarity in what has been a very murky story right from the beginning. Mr Barclay, of course, completely dropped off the radar late last year. He wasn't at work. We had confirmation of that, but that was basically all we had confirmation of. We didn't know why he wasn't there. The Ministry of Housing wouldn't explain his absence. And then earlier This month there was a statement out from a private PR firm which Mr Barclay had employed saying that he had resigned. And now the ministry is saying that Mr Barclay had been under an employment investigation at the point when he quit. It's not clear quite why this statement was put out today, but the ministry's chief executive, Andrew Crisp, basically lays out his version of events. He says he received complaints from employees, contractors and stakeholders about Mr Barclay's, quote, leadership behaviour, his treatment of others. There's a quote here: "The allegations reflected behaviours that are not consistent with standards expected of senior public servants." So Mr Crisp says he began an investigation, but that Mr Barclay quit. Before it was complete, he says there was no exit payment, no confidential deal, but that Mr Barclay just quit. He made that decision before the investigation was finished.
Incredibly direct press statement for an issue that they haven't really been talking about. So what has Mr Barclay said in response?
Yes, and this is where it gets murky again, because Mr Barclay has a completely different take on events. He issued his own statement very shortly after and began by basically saying he was extremely disappointed that the ministry had gone public. He said that it was a breach of his privacy, and then he went on to lay out how he saw things. He said that he is pursuing a case of constructive dismissal, which means basically that he feels he has no choice. He felt that he had no choice but to resign. So he admits that there were some complaints about him, but he says that they came only after the program was moved away from the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment and over to the Ministry of Housing, over to Andrew Crisp. So it seems very linked to that man. He goes on to say that the complaints came from people who were close to Andrew Crisp, and that they were about his management style. He describes it as a direct management style because he was working to meet the targets of the KiwiBuild program at pace. He says once those complaints came in, as soon as he was informed of them, he responded to them within the week, and that he asked that those complaints be independently investigated. Instead, he says, he was suspended from the role for more than 2 months, and at that point he said it was just untenable for him to stay on. He had to resign, and that's what's leading now to his legal action.
Craig, this all comes at a very interesting time, doesn't it? Because KiwiBuild has really been in the crossfire. Housing Minister Phil Twyford has, after his revelation that he's not going to meet his first year targets. This is a pretty, well, rocky backdrop, isn't it?
That's right, and this only is going to make it a lot messier. I mean, like you said last week, the Housing Minister Phil Twyford acknowledged there was no way the government's going to meet that 1,000 house target by July, that it was going to be much closer to, 300 or so, not even a third. And the opposition came swinging out at that, saying, well, Mr Twyford had to go, he clearly isn't cut out for the job. Now, here comes Stephen Barclay saying that while he was there, and this is what he says in his statement, while he was there, when he was in charge, the program was on track to meet its first year targets, which is an incredibly politically charged statement, particularly given the minister's recent concession. It's only going to heat this problem up for the minister, who is heading into his first cabinet meeting of the year tomorrow morning. KiwiBuild is surely going to be high on the agenda, how to clean up this mess. The Deputy Prime Minister, Winston Peters, of course, has already said that all the ministers are going to have to recommit themselves to this goal. So that's definitely going to be right at the top of the list. Mr Twyford today, though, no word from him. He's not talking. He says it would be inappropriate to comment on an employment matter.
Thanks for that. That is Craig McCulloch, our political reporter, reporting there on the latest on that KiwiBuild stoush. You're listening to Checkpoint. It is 13 minutes past 5. If you're feeling particularly warm while you're tuning into us this evening, you are not alone. The heat wave making its way up the country is cooking parts of the upper South Island and the east coast of the north. Right now, it is 31 degrees in Masterton, 30 degrees in Nelson and 30 degrees in Hastings. Ice creams have been on the menu, as you can imagine, and beaches, pools and rivers have been full of folks looking to cool off. And while many are enjoying the hot summer, councils, farmers and foresters are beginning to get nervous about the fire risk and dwindling water supplies. Alex Perrottet has the latest.
It had just gone 10 o'clock this morning when the temperature hit 26 degrees in Hastings. The line for water park Splash Planet was out the door as families sizzled and sought to escape the heat. Cherie was there with her children and says there's only one way to deal with the relentless hot days.
In the pool, out of the sun. That's just it, really.
What are you guys doing to get you guys hot today?
Yes.
What are you doing to keep cool?
Just swimming.
It wasn't just Hawke's Bay that sweltered. Napier was joined by Woodburn, near Blenheim, in taking out the day's high of a whopping 35 degrees. And the owner of the town's Delicia ice cream cafe, Peter Bristow, couldn't be happier.
Definitely it's more than December. We'd be selling maybe 30, 40 in December. At the moment, we're getting up to 80 to 100 on a really good day.
Chocolate ice creams are the top flavour choice, followed closely by the mandarin ginger sorbet. Mr Bristow, who's originally from the UK, has been in Marlborough for 4 years and says it's the hottest weather he's had.
This summer definitely feels a lot warmer. I must admit, I've been much more aware of it because, of course, with the cafe and before that, I've been usually working in the office, but it does seem to be, at the moment, hotter than I can remember.
The Met Service is close to declaring an official heatwave as extreme temperatures across the country linger longer than usual. Meteorologist Tui McInnes says that's driven by sweltering conditions coming from Australia. He says a heatwave becomes official when a number of places throughout the country meet the threshold. That means 5 consecutive days with maximum temperatures 5 degrees above average.
This one's quite interesting in that the heat's affecting the country as a whole. We are seeing a lot of towns that are showing forecast temperatures quite a bit above their average. So it's that, the fact that it's broadly affecting the country that makes this quite an interesting and remarkable event.
The warm weather broke a 157-year record in Nelson, where the minimum temperature was 24.3 degrees. It's been so hot in Hawke's Bay, shade sails have been stolen from a number of schools and businesses. The police have made a public plea on their Facebook page, saying it's unlikely just one person was responsible, as the stolen shades are commercial grade and would have required ladders as well as tools. The Hawke's Bay DHB Medical Officer of Health, Dr Nick Jones, says the elderly, sick and young could be vulnerable to the heat this week. He says people need to take care of themselves and others.
It's important that everyone, but particularly those who are most vulnerable, maintain their levels of hydration, make sure they drink plenty of water, try to keep as cool as possible and avoid doing any vigorous physical activity outside during the heat of the day.
While many are enjoying cooling off in pools and rivers, the Tasman district is on high alert for forest fires. It's shut the council-owned forest to the public for safety reasons. Water supplies are also drying up. A special dry weather task force is due to meet under urgency tomorrow to discuss the next steps, with immediate water restrictions in place for residents and farmers. Fire and Emergency New Zealand is on red alert. Spokesman Darren Woods says it's looking to put additional services such as aircraft and machinery operators on standby for the Tasman and Canterbury areas.
111 is the key message at the moment. If they're seeing anything that's suspicious or a potential of a fire or smoke in the area, then don't delay. Any time lost means that we could have a greater level of resource commitment required to actually deal with any ongoing events.
And with no significant rain forecast for at least the next 10 days, it will be a nervous wait for firefighters. For Checkpoint, Alex Perrottet.
You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We are keen for your feedback. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Let us know how you're keeping cool, if your town or city is one of the ones that is, well, blistering hot today. And also, we're going to be talking about the school summer holiday break, whether we should shorten it a little later in the program. So interested to hear what you think of that. 7 beachfront government housing units in Kaikoura are sitting empty whilst the homeless are sent to live in emergency housing as far away as Wellington. Homelessness is now a serious problem in the district, with 44 families currently on the emergency housing waiting list. The council says its hands are tied because the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment has allocated the units only for families displaced by the earthquakes. But as video journalist Logan Church reports, in the 9 months since the units were made available, some haven't even had a single occupant.
On the face of it, Kaikoura is a town on the up, bouncing back from one of the worst disasters in New Zealand's history. But many people here are still having a tough time of it. especially when it comes to finding accommodation due to a red-hot rental market. But beside the beach,
here we have a little village of 7 very vacant units at the moment. Yeah, and so meanwhile, from April, even before, we have had whānau in town on the brink of homelessness and haven't been able to find a place for them, and so they have been relocated out of town.
That's Ngaio Teoa. She wears many hats in Kaikoura. She sits on the Māori Council, but she also works directly with people who need emergency accommodation.
Nobody home.
The village here is simple, 7 portable units, each featuring 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, a kitchen. There is even a place for the dog around the back. But more importantly, they are warm, dry and not earthquake damaged, and they cost $225 a week to rent. The units were put here by the government last April to help those displaced by earthquake damage to their homes, and opened by the Associate Minister of Housing and Urban Development, Jenny Salesa. However, they have never been completely filled.
There have been people in dire need of homes, emergency homes. We're not saying that they should live here at this time, but what we needed is a place for them to come and have a warm, dry, safe whare.
To be eligible to rent a unit, the criteria is strict. You need confirmation your home is earthquake damaged, confirmation of a start and end date of building work, and, if needed, an approved building consent, among other things.
It's all because of this criteria, and in my mind the answer is simple. Change the criteria.
And until that happens, it leaves many in Kaikoura without many options. Ngaio can think of 3 families off the top of her head who desperately need accommodation like this now. One Kaikoura woman I spoke to, who didn't want to be identified, said she and her family are on the brink of homelessness.
In this house for 5 years. We've got good references and everything, but there's no houses available. And when houses do come available, there's so many people needing them that we aren't even looked at. So we don't have long to find a house for the 6 of us. If it comes down to it, we'd have to rely on something like that in order to not be homeless.
Ngaio Teoa says she has raised this issue repeatedly with both the government, who manages the units, and the Kaikoura District Council, who owns the land. She asked the council last year to ask the Ministry of Business Innovation and Employment to relax its rules. So I asked the council's Community Services Manager, Susie Haberstock, what happens next.
Our CEO rang MB at the end of last year, and apparently there is no shift for now. It's most definitely not ideal, because we do have 44 people on our register who have a housing need, but not one of them is eligible.
The council has tried to address housing issues across the district. A council-run housing forum is part of this. But when I asked Ms Haberstock if the council could have done more on this issue...
I agree.
You think the council should have done more earlier?
Yes. 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 It's always easy to say that in retrospect. We thought we were being proactive by creating a forum. The forum only meets once a month, so there is a bit of a lag. So we did the best we can under the circumstances, but there's always room for improvement.
And the reality for people faced with homelessness in Kaikoura is not a good one. Leaving or being relocated by MSD is often the only option. One man Ngaio was working with, who had to live on the beach, was relocated to Wellington just before Christmas to try and find help there. So that leaves the question of how many people have actually lived in the village. According to MBIE's Julia Shanahan, not many.
We acknowledge that the occupancy of the village has been quite low. We have had 5 households that have used the village since April 2018.
Is that what you expected?
Probably lower than expected. However, we understand that there's a lot of uncertainty around when repairs can happen to buildings. There's some people that are still yet to settle their insurance claims and schedule their building repairs.
So I asked Julia why MBIE couldn't just change the criteria for the units to deal with what has been perceived as a more immediate problem.
We aren't in a position to repurpose the use of the village. Once the needs of that community have been met in terms of earthquake-related building, and that has been completely satisfied, then we would be very open to repurposing the village.
She says there are 4 eligible families that are likely to need accommodation in the village within the next month. Both the council and NIO are now trying to figure out where to go from here. But that still leaves many people on the brink of homelessness, while 7 government units sit empty beside the beach. In Kaikoura for Checkpoint, Logan Church.
Summer holidays, summer school holidays, are they an epic adventure set against the backdrop of an endless summer, or a child-minding, wallet-draining, leave-sucking nightmare stretching, in some cases, up to 7 weeks? National List MP Nicola Willis reckons shortening the break could ease the financial strain on stressed working parents, and she's working on a private members' bill to get the law change moving. In a moment, we'll hear from Nicola Willis, but first, our cameraman Simon Rogers visited Christchurch's Margaret Mahi Playground to ask caregivers if the current summer break is too long.
I think they should be shorter. Yeah, as a working parent, my husband works. It's expensive to put them in childcare, to feel like the children are kind of getting the necessary kind of entertainment they need, the education they need. And when we are at home with them, so we use all our annual leave for the summer holidays, you know, we just don't have the finances to take them out on lots of recreational trips. So it's a struggle for us. I've got a daughter with a lot of additional needs, registered disabled, so often mainstream child carers aren't able to look after her, which kind of makes it even more of a challenge for us. I think, you know, a week shorter, maybe even 2 weeks shorter would be absolutely perfect.
I think the kids need that break, to be honest. Yeah, I'm a bit either way, really. Well, their father's actually looking after them, so their mother works at the moment. But yeah, they're not really reliant on things like that, whereas some families are. I can understand them wanting the holidays to be a bit less.
I think they should be longer.
Same with me.
No.
And I guess, yeah, what else do you do? How do you organise childcare and school holidays?
We are the childcare, yeah, because these are our grandchildren, so we look after the grandchildren in all the holidays.
Our parents are
and
at
we
work.
used to always go up to Tauranga, up to Papamoa and stay, because they had a beach house up there, but that's since been sold, so we just do local activities.
National's Nicola Willis is a mother of 4, including 3 school-aged children. She came into our parliamentary studio earlier today and I asked her to lay out her case for changing the institution that is the summer holiday.
Look, I love the summer holidays and I think family time together is really important and children enjoy the time off. But it's also a real stress on families once you get into about week 6 because they're trying to juggle often full-time work and childcare. Most people only get 4 weeks annual leave. There's 12 weeks of school holidays in the year, so families have to stretch to cover it. And I hear of people not finding school holiday programs that work for their kid, having to spend hundreds of extra dollars each week to have their children looked after. And there's also research showing that children's learning progress can go backwards during this time. So I'm starting a conversation and saying, do parents in New Zealand think it might be time to shorten the summer break?
So what do you reckon? Shave off a couple of weeks or what?
Oh, look, I really want to hear from parents on this. I want to hear about their experiences.
But you are
how
a
they
parent.
manage this time of year. Yeah,
you are a parent. So what do you reckon? What are your thoughts? 1 or 2 weeks?
So my thoughts are, look, first, I think it would be great if more schools made their premises available for school holiday programs. I think that could relieve some pressure. And I think if the holidays were a week shorter, that would be good. You know, you look at Australia, they have about 200 days of school a year. In New Zealand, we're about 190. So shaving off a few days wouldn't have us too far out when you compare us with other countries, and I think could make a real difference for parents under pressure.
Okay, so there's a few things there. If you went down to just 11 weeks holiday a year, got rid of 1 week altogether, what do you reckon the teachers would think of that?
Look, I want to hear from teachers on this. I know that teachers spend that 12 weeks when children aren't in the classroom. A lot of it they spend working. They deserve a proper break too, and I absolutely support that. But my question is, should they be spending weeks of time doing administration, planning and preparation, or would they prefer to spend that time in front of the classroom?
So when are they supposed to do their planning and preparation if you were to take one of those weeks away?
Look, I think within a 12-week, within an 11-week period, teachers could manage some time off for themselves, some time for planning, some time for preparation, some time for assessment, and potentially a bit more time in front of the classroom.
So do they get too long a holiday break, teachers? Do they get too many holidays at the moment?
No, look, that's not where I'm coming from. What I'm concerned about is the stories I hear from parents who are really feeling the pressure at this time of year, who are finding the juggle a bit much, particularly those people who don't have flexible work, who aren't able to work from home, who don't have friends and family available to help out, and who feel really stretched by childcare costs. It's those concerns that are motivating me, and they're what I want to address.
So would you have the kids come back a week earlier, basically, on that scenario?
I think so. I think so, but I want to hear from people on that subject. I've already had feedback this morning from someone suggesting, well, maybe they should be at school right up to Christmas because that's the time of year that's particularly stressful for parents at work. Look, there are different suggestions that will be out there. I want to hear people's feedback.
Either way, if you are taking away a week, you're making the learning term longer. And that's kind of why we went to 4 terms, wasn't it? Because we were saying that, well, pushing kids through 11, 12 weeks of learning in a single stint meant that teachers were tired, kids were tired, they weren't taking in all the information. You're going backwards then, aren't you, if you go back to that?
Look, there's no question children need time off, they need a break, and at the moment they do get that in school holidays. We also have good public holidays in New Zealand which mean that children get time off. What the research tells us, and Tom Nicholson from Auckland has spoken about this, is that children's learning progress can really slide downhill when the break is as long as 6 weeks, because it's just a long time away from the classroom and the literacy progress that could be occurring. And sometimes teachers are spending a lot of time trying to get kids back up to speed after that period.
But
so the question is about the length of the break.
Don't parents have a degree of responsibility there?
Absolutely, parents have a degree of responsibility, and the parents I speak to try very hard to have enriching activities for their children during the holidays. But the reality is that in many households in New Zealand, the TV is on because parents are trying to work, and many parents do have their children in school holiday programs, and they won't necessarily be sitting down and doing maths exercises with them. That's just real life.
So here's an idea, rather than shorten the school holiday break, why not extend the annual leave, the minimum annual leave for workers?
Oh look, I've had people make that suggestion, and I think the reality with that is that we'd need to have employers and people on board, and that could be very expensive. And I think all of us fundamentally want to see wages growing. We want to see the economy more productive so that wages can grow, and my concern would be that simply extending annual leave could detract from those goals.
But there's costs involved in what you want to do as well. If you're going to put teachers back into the classroom earlier, if you are suggesting that we open up schools and have holiday programs, and if the school is actually going to be operating a week longer in a year, that costs money too, doesn't it?
Look, potentially. We're talking about a 3% increase in the school year.
And what's that,
you're also
what's
looking
that in real
at
money, do you think, Nicola? What do you think that would cost in real money?
Well, when you look at the current operational grant, that would have some costs that we'd have to look at carefully, but you'd also be saving money because you would reduce the work and income subsidies that are provided during this period. And I'd wager that there would be some productivity gains as well because parents would be able to better contribute to the workplace during this time.
Have you done the numbers?
The costs are absolutely something I want to look at, Lisa, and they need to be part of this conversation and need to be
considered. But you haven't got that far yet.
No, I haven't. And look, this is not National Party policy. Let me be very clear. This is a conversation I want to start because I've had a lot of working parents say to me they're finding this time of year stressful. I want to be brave and ask the question, and I want to hear people's feedback. It's important that we're in touch with working families and the realities of their lives, and this is a subject that keeps coming up.
Okay, so have you talked to the teachers directly? Have you talked to any of the teachers'
No, I've talked to some people who teach, and they have told me that they have seen children slip back over this period.
But not to the unions. You haven't floated this with the unions.
And I absolutely intend to sit down and talk with them, and I look forward to those conversations. They can be very constructive, I'm sure.
As you point out, this would be a private members bill. So have you discussed this with your own education spokesperson, Nikki Kay? Because in the past, when changes to the school year have been discussed, she's been very clear it would need significant support from parents. So what does she think of your idea?
Absolutely. So Nikki Kay, I've talked to about this proposal, and she supports me starting this conversation. We want to hear from parents about what they think, and Simon Bridges supports me having this conversation. Look, the reality of policy formation in the National Party is that we listen to New Zealanders about the issues that concern them, we take on their ideas and feedback, and then we'll be developing a manifesto for 2020. This is a real concern in many communities, and I want to hear people's ideas about how we address it.
What do you fancy your chances are of getting a change?
Oh, look, we'll see. I'm getting some really supportive emails. I had an email from someone this morning saying, look, I'm a Labour Party supporter, but you're really speaking to me and my concern. It's been a very difficult time for our family. And I think that there are lots of families out there who share that view. Equally, I think we all have a nostalgic and warm view of the great Kiwi break. I share that view. I love the time with my kids during this time. So it's a matter of balancing those two things.
And that is National List MP Nicola Willis there talking about, well, she thinks that maybe the summer break is too long, the summer school break. Let us know what you think. We would love your feedback. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or Facebook us Checkpoint, email at checkpoint@rnz.co.nz or 2101 on the text. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, it's the first week back at school for many students, but where are the teachers? The death toll from a dam collapse at a mine in Brazil rises, with hundreds still missing, and police launch an investigation after a woman was knocked out by a single punch to the head in Manukau over the weekend. But first, here's Paul Brennan with the headlines.
Thank you, Lisa. The former KiwiBuild boss, Stephen Barclay, is taking a case of constructive dismissal against the government, saying his suspension gave him no other option than to resign. The Housing Ministry says Mr Barclay quit his role while being investigated over complaints from staff about his behaviour. Its chief executive, Andrew Crisp, said he had complaints from employees, contractors and stakeholders. Mr Barclay says no issues were raised about him before KiwiBuild was transferred to the Housing Ministry from the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment. As this week's heatwave kicks in, temperatures have soared into the mid-30s in Napier and Woodburn. Both got to 35 degrees at about 4 o'clock, and Richmond near Nelson broke records with an overnight minimum temperature of 24.3 degrees. An Auckland public health expert says an unwillingness by governments to put policies into practice is behind a worldwide failure to reduce obesity. Boyd Swinburne is co-chair of a major new report for The Lancet, which focuses on 3 related pandemics: obesity, malnutrition and climate change. The report says 1 billion people are hungry, another 2 billion eat too much of the wrong food, and food production and consumption methods are adding to greenhouse gas emissions. Experts from 14 countries are calling for a global treaty to defeat the trio of pandemics. Labour inspectors say hundreds of migrant workers are probably being exploited in the hospitality sector, but some don't want to come forward. In 2 decisions, the Employment Relations Authority has fined a Hawke's Bay restaurant and an Auckland flooring company for flouting the rules. In the Napier case, Golden Spring Takeaway made 2 migrant staff work long hours, 7 days a week, with no days off for more than 6 months. A shoreline search for 2 fishermen missing in Southland is being called off for the day. A helicopter and the land search and rescue team are continuing to work into the evening, but boats have had to stop because of high winds and 4-metre swells. Yesterday afternoon, the alarm was raised when the 2 men appeared to have been swept off rocks near Slope Point Road in the Catlins. That's the news.
Thanks, Paul, and it's time to get our dose of business with Nona Peltier. Nona, special milk producer Sinalay, so they're dropping their farm gate milk price forecasts, are they?
That's right, they are, yeah, and that's in line with what we've seen with Fonterra as well. So their price is going to be $6.25, and that's down about 7% from where it was before at $6.75. Now, it's interesting because the price overall in the global dairy trade auctions have been rising over the last 4 consecutive auctions. But there's a lot of pressure in New Zealand's production, for example, has extended beyond spring to summer, so it's still strong. At the same time, the Northern Hemisphere's production is exceeding expectations too. So that's why the prices come down, and there is still considerable price pressure there. So the thing is, farmers are aware of it, and after all, they are producing more, so I guess they'll make it some way or another. We'll see what happens.
And a shortage of nurses. This is in aged care businesses, is it?
Yes. So now, you might recall last year there was a strike by registered nurses through the district health boards. These are nurses that worked for... And anyways, that had a knock-on effect into the aged care sector, where they also employ registered nurses. That sector has had to increase labour costs so that they could keep these nurses employed. But nevertheless, they don't have enough. So they're doing training and all sorts of things. And they're saying, look, this problem isn't going to go away until the government looks at adding registered nurses to the long-term skill shortage where immigration is concerned. And that's what they're pushing for now. They're saying, look, we aren't going to be able to meet this shortage. This is an aging population we're facing. Something needs to be done in the long term and some action needs to be taken so they can go out there and actively
recruit from overseas.
Yeah, that's right.
So what's been happening on the market today?
Interesting, it's been pretty quiet, as you can imagine. Australia Day, and as well Auckland's had its anniversary day. So we were a little changed, rising just 4 points to 9,114. Now, actually the dollar has had quite a bump up over the weekend. So on Friday we were a whole cent less than we are right now against the US dollar at 68.7 US cents. That's all because of what's happening with the US dollar, and interest rates there really has very little to do with what's going around here. 95.3 Australian, that's actually steady because the Australian dollar has also risen against the US dollar, and 52 British pence.
Thank you, Nona. It is the first week back at school for many students, but as classrooms opened their doors this morning, where were the teachers? The government announced last year it would begin a major push to recruit 1,500 more teachers by 2021, including hundreds from overseas. But as of today, the first day of term 1, recruitment agencies are still trying to fill 280 teaching roles. Now that's despite the government hiring 220 teachers from overseas to help cover the shortage affecting schools across the country. Now, we sent our reporter Nita Blake-Person and cameraman Dan Cook along to one Auckland school to see how they're coping with the staffing crisis.
This is our staff room. This is the place that we've had a fair few farewells last year.
It's a new school year at Auckland's Balmoral School, but Principal Malcolm Milner says the problems remain the same.
14 farewells we had last year.
And that was more than ever before?
Yeah, that's a lot for us over the course. Although we do have 60 staff, 60 registered teachers, 14 is a lot for our school.
The Decile 9 school in central Auckland has a roll of around 900 students in years 1 to 8. Mr Milner says it's a great place to work, but the high cost of living and pressures of teaching mean his staff are leaving in droves.
One day I had 3 teachers come and tell me they were leaving, and the last one was crying, saying, "I'm sorry, I didn't want to do this to you, Malcolm."
He's had to scramble to find 2 teachers to fill classrooms until the end of term 1, but his search to find people to take those roles when they leave isn't going well.
So this is it?
Yeah, these are the two applicants I've had so far. I think it's like at least 4 weeks of advertisements. I mean, admittedly we've got some time to go. I think around about the 13th of February, but that's what I've got so far.
Mr Milner says he's constantly worried about how long teachers will stay and how he'll replace them when they leave.
I had to ask one of my teachers, so we had a retirement due for her, and then the next day I had to go to her and say, "Look, I know we farewelled you, but I need a teacher for these children for this term. Will you come back?" And, you know, she was like, "Yeah, I'll do it for the children."
Last year, the government announced it was putting $370 million towards funding 1,500 more teachers by 2021. But as students return from summer holidays this week, there are estimated to be nearly 300 teaching jobs still vacant across the country.
Schools are being required to do more and more and more and more. And I think, tragically, it's a low-paid profession. It's a low-paid profession. And so it's not an option for those students in year 13 to go out. They can earn far more money at a higher paying profession. So we talk about a low wage economy. We've got teaching a low wage profession.
The Ministry for Education estimates that an extra 650 primary teachers and 200 secondary teachers are needed this year, adding to the country's pool of around 70,000 teachers. But keeping them here is a challenge.
I had a year 2 teacher last year resign and go to Hong Kong. He left his job here, 56,000. He's on 92,000 New Zealand dollars in Hong Kong at a school.
The ministry says it's managed to find 7,300 overseas teachers wanting to teach in New Zealand, of which 1,000 have been screened and are available for interviews. But Malcolm Milner says more money is needed to boost Kiwi recruits.
Look, if you're an employer and responsible and you couldn't get workers, what's the first thing you do in the private sector? You increase the wage to attract those people. I think we have all the rhetoric going on that teaching's important and it's important to us. But at the end of the day, you know, you've got to attract people, and pay is an attraction.
Teachers have been in a pay dispute with the government since last year when hundreds striked over pay and working conditions. Primary and secondary teachers aren't ruling out joining forces to strike this year. In the meantime, Malcolm Milner is focused on filling the 2 positions he currently has advertised, but says it's slim pickings.
Both of them I have to go back for more information because one person hasn't filled out the application pack, so it says CV, and I don't have the CV, so I'll need to find out more information. The other one, I've got a great CV, they've taught for 6 months overseas, but there's no teacher registration, so I don't know if they are registered to be able to teach.
The Education Minister Chris Hipkins says he's had talks with the Primary Teachers Union over the holidays, and he's told them the government won't increase the value of its current offer, which runs to $1.2 billion over 4 years. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Nita Blake-Person.
The death toll from a dam collapse at an iron ore mine in Brazil at the weekend has risen to nearly 60, with hundreds still missing. The collapse triggered a deadly mudslide which buried mining facilities in nearby homes in the town of Brumadinho, north of Rio de Janeiro. The mining company Vale has been blasted by local officials for being careless and incompetent. From the scene of the disaster, the BBC's Julia Canero has this report.
A sea of mud, with hundreds missing beneath it. This could be the most tragic mining disaster in Brazil's history. The conditions are challenging for searches. Most areas can't be reached on foot. The army say the ground is too dangerous. People here describe a scene of horror as the mudslide engulfed this community.
What I saw was the ground was shaking, trees were rolling and breaking like toys. 10, 12-metre trees were like little toys rolling around.
Hundreds of families have lost loved ones. Many others have lost their homes and everything they owned. This wasn't a natural disaster. This is industrial waste from the iron ore mine that provided work for so many here, stored above this community and held by a dam that gave way.
The city's Paraupeba River has been tinted by residue from iron ore extraction. Mining is the main economic activity here in Brumadinho, its main source of jobs, but now the cause of this unprecedented tragedy that will mark generations to come.
The mining company Vale insists the dam was being closely monitored, but prosecutors have already begun moves to freeze the company's assets for damages. 3 years ago, another disaster took place at another mine in the same state, jointly run by Vale. 19 people died, and the waste from here caused Brazil's worst ever environmental disaster. The family's sorrow is mixed with outrage. This young lady's father is a driver and was working at the mine on Friday. She keeps calling his mobile phone, and it keeps ringing. The country is shocked that this was allowed to happen again, and still trying to understand the scale of this disaster.
That's Julia Canero reporting there from Brazil. It is 13 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback. Keep it coming. We're getting a few texts regarding whether we should, shorten the summer holiday break. We'd love to hear from some teachers, so do text us 2101. Let us know what you think. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email us at checkpoint@rnz.co.nz on the school holiday break or anything else that's on your mind. Now, the concept of another environmental party has backing from National, but the government says it's a laughable attempt by the opposition to make friends. The man pushing for it, Vernon Tava, is a former candidate and co-convener of the Green Party and even ran for the leadership. He then tried and failed to win a National Party ticket to Parliament. Now, he's floating the possibility of a new political party, which he believes will fill a void that's opened up in the environment space. Here's our political reporter Gia Garrick.
Vernon Tava swears it's not a blue-green party he's looking at.
It's not designed to be just an adjunct to the National Party. It certainly hasn't come from the National Party. The idea is that any new party would be a true centrist party that would be able to work with left or right and wouldn't overtly commit itself to one side or the other of the political spectrum.
Mr Tava says he hasn't spoken to the National Party about this, but that's not to say National leader Simon Bridges isn't interested. He's calling it an opportunity for a chunk of environmentally conscious New Zealanders who don't see the Green Party as the right fit.
At the moment you've got a Green Party that very much is to the left of Labour, that will only go with Labour. And, my view, there'll be a group of New Zealanders there, how significant's hard to say, but who say, well, actually, they're not representing me. They're caught up in, whether it's drug reform, whether it's trendy left-wing issues, but not focused on the environment and not able to be that swing party in the middle.
But the former Green Party MP Sue Bradford says the Greens as they are today have never been more centrist.
We've gone a long way towards the sort of aspirations of meeting that environmental and business connection through the leadership of James Shaw.
Ms Bradford says the only real gap is a party further to the left than where the Greens are now. But she says Mr Tava would never go there because as far as she's concerned, he's only keen to marry up to National.
It's really hard to imagine a new party getting into Parliament unless the National Party provided an empty seat and this National Party supported Green organisation put Ven and Tava up into that seat. I think in that case they'd have a chance of getting in. But in terms of building up to anything like even 2 or 3% of the vote, it's very hard to imagine how that would happen.
The senior government minister, Chris Hipkins, was of a similar opinion, calling the move desperate and cynical.
That's the National Party's track record, is that they try and do cheap and dodgy deals in order to try and shore up votes in Parliament. I think voters can see through that, though.
The environmental group Forest and Bird is politically neutral but encourages all political parties to have strong environmental policies. Chief Executive Kevin Haig says if a new party in the environmental space encourages broader debate on the matter, it could be a good thing.
We're facing a crisis here. We can't wait for just the right kind of government. Whoever is in government, we have got to find ways to succeed with them. So anything that achieves better environmental policies has got to be a good thing.
The Green Party refused to be interviewed by RNZ about any new centrist environment party, with a spokesperson saying they had nothing to add on the matter. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Gia Garrick.
And time for some of your feedback now. We're getting lots of contact from you about this proposal that Nicola Willis is throwing around from the National Party. She's drafting a private members bill. Should we shorten the summer school holiday break? Gary says, I oppose the reduction in school holidays as it's the only time many families have quality time. And it's time people stop passing their responsibilities onto schools, he says. Another texter says, by the time my son goes back to school for year 9 on the 8th of February, he would have had over 8 weeks off. Lucky boy. It's far too long, this person says. 6 weeks would be ideal. And this one from Sandy. Sandy says, use uni students on holiday to run 1 or 2 week programs, holiday programs, for the last 2 weeks of the January holidays. Pay minimum wage, win-win for everyone. Difficult and expensive for working families, says Sandy. Small cost to the government for well-being and for society. Thanks for your feedback. Do keep it coming. Venezuela's president, Nicolas Maduro, remains defiant in the face of an unprecedented challenge to his authority. Last week, the opposition leader, Juan Guaido, declared himself interim president. He won wide international support and has offered amnesty to soldiers who join him. For his part, Mr Maduro has rejected an ultimatum by several European countries to hold fresh elections within 8 days. Meanwhile, thousands continue to flee the country's economic hardships, as BBC's Aleem Makbul reports from the Venezuela-Colombia border.
Through fields and streams around the border, we find desperate Venezuelans crossing illegally into Colombia. Among them is Yulette, a school teacher, here with her cousin, but upset at having had to leave her mother back home.
It's horrible. We're going through all of this just to get a bit of food, because there's nothing in Venezuela. There's nothing.
As it was, she told me, her monthly salary could only just buy a dozen eggs. The growing international condemnation of Venezuela's president clearly isn't persuading people here. Their troubles will soon be over. Well, many of those Venezuelans who've come here tell us the only way they feel their president is going to step down is not as a direct result of the Western pressure, but more something that will only happen when Venezuela's powerful military finally turn their back on him. Venezuela's military attaché to Washington, Colonel Jose Luis Silva, has abandoned Maduro and says he recognizes the opposition figure, Juan Guaido, as rightful president.
No conmigo, vengan con nosotros.
Mr. Guaido, who just days ago declared himself interim leader, has offered an amnesty to others who do the same. But But President Maduro appears far from worried, rejecting demands from European countries, including the UK, that he calls fresh elections. All the while, Venezuelans continue to face hardship. Junior helps smuggle people out of the country.
Derrotado.
People feel defeated, he tells me. They don't have clothes or money. They sleep in the open. They feel defeated. And Junior says in recent days he's had more demand from people wanting to be smuggled out than ever before.
Ali Maqbul there, and today Australia joined the US, Britain, France and a number of Latin American countries in recognising Juan Guaidó as interim president. The New Zealand government has said it won't be giving official recognition to either side, saying it's not its practice. The Foreign Affairs Minister, Winston Peters, says Venezuela should be allowed to decide its own fate through free and fair elections. Residents of Bell Block in New Plymouth are outraged after a massive 1.5 million litre sewage spill from a council pumping station left the Vanuatu stream running white and killing dozens of fish and eels. Despite happening last week, the council has not told the public of the spill via its website, social media platforms, nor has it briefed the news media. It has put up signs and changed a local water quality indicator to red alert status, warning people not to swim or gather shellfish. Our Taranaki Wanganui reporter Robin Martin has more.
Kim Soman says her 11-year-old son Luke returned home last week distraught after going to feed eels in the Vanuatu stream, only to discover more than 20 dead fish and eels in or near the water. Mrs Soman says the pool at the stream mouth is a favourite playground of local children and normally teeming with aquatic life.
Luke was a little bit distressed because he's a little bit of a nature lover, and he came home and just said there was heaps of dead fish down on the side of the stream, like lots of cockabillies, and that he'd found a little baby eel that he'd tried to rescue and put it in some fresher water.
Mrs Soman returned to the stream with Luke the next morning. She's horrified to think her boy was playing in the water.
We jumped in the car and came down, and we could find a few, but I suspect that the seagulls probably ate lots of them, but there were definitely a few fish, and there was like all the rocks were a black colour, and the colour of the water just doesn't seem right. It doesn't look healthy.
Yeah, can you describe it this morning?
Well, it all seems to be like this bluey grey colour. It doesn't normally look like this.
Luke is still feeling pretty cut up about the experience.
How did you feel when you saw all that?
It's pretty stink because like normally there's heaps of like live fish, and then when I seen them all dead, it was kind of sad.
Bob, a local who didn't want to give his last name, says he saw the stream shortly after the spill, which the New Plymouth District Council says occurred overnight on January the 21st.
I seen a few days ago, I don't know exactly when, there was a spillage in the stream from, I think it was the pumping station, and the stream more or less went to grey to white. Like a milk tank had emptied its tank in there. It's really discoloured.
In a statement, the Taranaki Regional Council says it's been responding to a significant discharge from a New Plymouth District Council sewage pumping station on the Vanuatu stream. Its compliance manager, Bruce Pope, says the District Council has undertaken a clean-up and the Regional Council is investigating. But there's no news of the spill on the Regional Council website or on its social media channels. Mr Pope says public notification is the District Council's responsibility. The New Plymouth District Council's Chief Operating Officer, Kelvin Wright, has apologised for the spill and has notified Hapu and all interested parties. But no media release was issued, there's no news of the spill on its website's news pages, or its Can I Swim page, or its Facebook page. That doesn't wash with Glenn Skipper, who is on the board of the Ngāti Tāwhirikura Hapu and a member of the Puketapu Hapu, which share a common border at the Vanuatu stream. He says spillages are a common occurrence.
We're getting regular notifications from the council, from the regional council and from the local council around spillages, contamination events, and so, but the whole stream turning white, you know, dead eels and fishes, and it's 2019, it's just crazy.
Mr Skipper says it's time the Taranaki Regional Council put its foot down and demanded a permanent fix. According to the Regional Council, there have been 6 sewage infrastructure incidents involving the Vanuatu stream over the past 5 years, none of which have resulted in enforcement action. I ngā mutu mo te hōtaka o te Atenei, ko Robin Martinaho.
And returning to our earlier story about whether the school holiday break over the summer should be shortened or not, Costas says great stuff, Nicola, referring to Nicola Willis, nail overworked teachers again by taking away perhaps the one thing that gets them through the year, Costas says. Unbelievable how out of touch some politicians are with teachers in this country. And this one from Steve, who says, parents complain after 6 weeks of full-time children. Imagine how teachers feel after 11 weeks, says Steve. Another texter says there's not nearly enough time in the holidays to do everything that I want to with my grandkids. And please challenge Nicola, she says, from the National Party. They say they want to listen to people, but they didn't do that last time they were in power, she says. Time for the news.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Paul Brennan. The former head of KiwiBuild, Stephen Barclay, is pursuing legal action against the government, saying he felt he had no choice but to resign. The Ministry of Housing issued a statement this afternoon saying Mr Barclay quit in January during an investigation into complaints about his treatment of others. But Stephen Barclay says he's extremely disappointed the ministry has breached his privacy. He says there were complaints about his direct management style, which he requested be independently investigated. Instead, he was suspended for more than 2 months, making his position untenable and leading him to resign. Mr Barclay is now pursuing a case of constructive dismissal. Forest and Bird is open to the idea of a new Environment Party in Parliament if it pushes the government it goes with to have policies that are more environmentally friendly. Forest and Bird's Chief Executive, Kevin Haig, says his organisation isn't political, so isn't keen to comment on where such a new Environment Party might fit politically. But he says if it means a broader debate about the environment, he's for it.
We're facing a crisis here. We can't wait for just the right kind of government. Whoever is in government, we have got to find ways to succeed with them. So anything that achieves better environmental policies has got to be a good thing.
Forest and Bird's Chief Executive Kevin Haig. Rural health supporters want more funding to help cover the burden of tourism on small practices. The number of visitors to the country is predicted to reach 5.1 million within 5 years. The head of the Rural General Practice Network, Dalton Kelly, says rural practices are facing increasing workloads without additional support. And he says during the tourist season, a rural doctor or nurse may have to answer. Mr Kelly says medical services shouldn't be forgotten in the visitor boom.
We have funding going to provide new car parking and new toilets, but I think those sort of things fade in comparison to a tourist knowing that there's a very good health service available if something goes wrong on their trip. So we need to address this seriously.
Dalton Kelly says the government needs to pitch in more funding to help GPs in rural areas keep up with the rising demand. Experts from 14 countries have appealed for a global treaty to defeat the pandemics of obesity, hunger and climate change, which they say are intertwined. A report by the Lancet Commission says 1 billion people are hungry, another 2 billion are eating too much of the wrong food, and production and consumption methods are adding to greenhouse gas emissions. Food policy professor Karina Hawkes, who contributed to the study, says the food industry is adding to what is an unsustainable imbalance.
All the incentives in the marketplace are trying to encourage people to buy more. That's more food, eating more food, and that's bad for obesity. And more consumables is bad for climate change because it means more goods are produced and more consumed, which is responsible for greenhouse gas emissions. And the inequality in that system means that there are still people who don't consume enough.
Karina Hawkes says governments around the world need to intervene and stop subsidising unhealthy foods. Napier and Woodburn near Blenheim have recorded the hottest temperatures in the country today. Temperatures peaked at 35 degrees at about 4 o'clock before a sea breeze kicked in and cooled both areas down to the high 20s. And a 157-year temperature record was broken overnight, with the temperature in Richmond in the Nelson region not falling below 24.3 degrees. Met Service says it's still possible other record-breaking temperatures will be recorded in this week's heatwave. Fire officials say the fire danger is particularly high in Northland, Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, and many districts have total fire bans. A prominent human rights lawyer in China has been sentenced to 4.5 years in prison for subversion. Wang Quanzhang was caught up in a series of arrests of lawyers and activists in China in 2015. He had defended political campaigners and followers of the outlawed spiritual movement Falun Gong. A US academic has stepped down after complaints she criticised Chinese students for speaking their own language on campus. In an email, Megan Neely from the Duke University School of Medicine said she'd encouraged all students to use English all the time. Here's the BBC's Chris Buckler.
Megan Neely said she was approached by two members of Duke University staff after they observed first-year students speaking Chinese very loudly on campus. They claimed it was impolite to have a conversation that others couldn't understand, and Dr. Neely said she was encouraging all students to commit to speaking English 100% of the time. That led to a petition for the North Carolina College to investigate her actions. The Dean of the university's medical school has apologised for the comments and made clear that there are no restrictions on what languages are used on campus.
Chris Buckler reporting there. It's 6:05. On to sport now. The New Zealand batsmen are doing their best to steady the ship after a poor start in the third one-day cricket international against India in Mount Maunganui. A short time ago, the Black Caps were 191 for 5 after 40 overs. After winning the toss and opting to bat, the New Zealand openers Martin Guptill and Colin Munro didn't last long, making 13 and 7 respectively. Skipper Kane Williamson was the third wicket to fall, out for 28. Henry Nicholls has just gone out for 6. Ross Taylor remains at the crease, currently on 78. India is ahead 2-0 in the 5-match series. The All Black Sevens player Dylan Collier is unconcerned by the team's failure to reach the final of the Hamilton leg of the World Series. The New Zealand women's team won their invitational tournament, but the All Black Sevens were beaten by the United States in the semi-finals before winning the bronze medal match against South Africa to stay in touch with series leaders Fiji and the United States. Fiji won the men's title, beating the United States in the final. The next World Series leg is in Sydney this weekend, and Collier believes there's not too much to work on.
Executing in pressure moments, I think there's key moments in games where we sort of got the wrong call from the ref or whatever, but we just have to put that to the side and be able to come together.
Dylan Collier. The International Paralympic Committee has stripped Malaysia of the right to host the 2019 World Para Swimming Championships after the country banned Israeli athletes from participating. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Dana Johansson looks back on the weekend sport, along with the Silver Ferns' recent netball quad series in England. Was it a case of one step forward, 2 steps back? Well, that's better than 3. There's a window on the word of Uganda's orphans, and the botanist Peter DeLonghi speaks for the lichen. Just as important as the trees, on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
We're funded through New Zealand On Air. Here's the short forecast now through to midnight tomorrow, Tuesday, from Met Service. For all of the North Island, mainly fine and hot inland. However, areas of cloud, especially morning and night, and isolated showers about the Central Plateau late tomorrow afternoon and evening. For Nelson, fine and hot. Buller, Westland and Fiordland, cloudy periods for the rest of today. A few showers. Fine and hot inland tomorrow. Marlborough, Canterbury, Otago and Southland, generally fine and hot inland, but cloudy periods about the coast, mainly morning and night. Chatham Islands, cloudy at times with possible drizzle tomorrow morning. It's just after 6:07.
I'm Lisa Howen and you're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Hot, hot, hot seem to be the common theme of the weather forecast. In fact, much of the country is still cooking in a record-breaking heatwave tonight. It comes across from the Tasman, and while temperatures here haven't reached the extremes that our Aussie neighbours have seen, they are hot and persistently so by New Zealand standards. Records dating back more than 150 years have toppled. Water restrictions are in place and fire crews are keeping a close eye on the tinder dry conditions. The upper South Island and east coast of the North Island have been the hottest spots. NIWA Principal Scientist Chris Brandolino has the temperatures.
Yeah, 34.5 in Blenheim, and wow, 34, I believe, 0.2, and 33.8 is the wider Nelson region. That is significant because that is the warmest January temperature going back to 1862, and the third warmest temperature of any month of any day going back to 1862 in the wider Nelson area. Now, what's really interesting there as well is that earlier this morning, the wider Nelson region experienced its warmest overnight temperature on record ever, going back to 1862, with an overnight minimum of just 24.3 degrees. So it's been a very warm day, start to finish, in the wider Nelson region.
Yeah, those are some smoking hot temperatures. Why? Why is it so hot?
Well, a few things. Well, the big thing, the hot air coming from Australia, that's certainly a key component. Tasman sea temperatures have been running warmer than average. I don't think that's a huge component, but if they were cooler than average, that would certainly modify the air. And, we basically, it's that time, it's a hot time of year. And in the background, our climate is changing. Temperatures go back, have been warming about 1 degree Celsius over the past 100, 110 years. So it's a very slow background warming. So when we get events like these, they really do stick out.
Is there any relief in sight? How long is it going to go on for?
Probably the rest of the work week. I think on Friday we'll see relief, starting for the lower part of the South Island. On Thursday, I beg your pardon, lower part of the South Island. Then up across the upper half of the South Island by Thursday evening, we should see relief. Not until Friday will that relief work its way north into the North Island. So basically several more days of, if it's not 30 or 31 or 35 or 30, it'll be somewhere in the lower to middle 30s. And for the North Island especially, we'll have to deal with humidity valleys. So many successive days of warm temperatures, hot temperatures, humid weather, making it difficult to sleep if you don't have a fan or air conditioning. And that could begin really to take a toll, especially mid and late week. Got to watch the fire risk as well. And certainly, just all around, just playing it smart, not overexerting yourself, especially during peak heating of the day.
If we wanted to escape this, is there a particular town or city that's got bad or low temperatures?
West Coast, yeah, go to the west coast of the South Island. That's probably one of the cooler locations. Or maybe the Southland. That may be one of the cooler locations relative to the rest of the country.
You're a smart man, Chris. Where are you?
I'm in Blenheim, and actually I'll be a speaker on... it's following me, right? Tasting my own medicine. I'll be speaking at the International Sauvignon Blanc celebration about and talking about our climate and how those climates differ in a few different of the wine regions of New Zealand.
And how are you going to keep cool at that, Chris?
I'll probably be in a climate-controlled room.
Because I think they've warned us not to drink alcohol or limit our alcohol during these very hot temperatures.
Yes, limit your alcohol intake, and I'll be following that advice for sure.
I'm very concerned about your hydration levels.
I'll be sure to look after myself well, at least somebody will. I'll do one for every glass of wine, one glass of water.
And that is Niwa weather guru Chris Brandolino there. And if you think it is hot here, well, thousands of bats are literally dropping out of Adelaide trees, stone dead due to heat stress after the mercury cracked 45 degrees last week in South Australia's heatwave. Animal rescue groups scrambled to hose down the grey-headed flying foxes to prevent them from overheating, and now they are fostering some of the orphaned baby bats. Sue Westover is the flying fox coordinator at Fauna Rescue South Australia, and she told me that once it gets over about 40 degrees, the flying foxes are in deep trouble.
With the grey-headed flying foxes, or any flying foxes, they don't cope well with the heat, and they suffer with heat stress, and they just start dropping out of the trees. Many die. We're estimating that we've currently processed about 1,500 deceased bats between us and the Adelaide Zoo and the council and the Botanic Gardens. We've counted probably 1,500 deceased, but there's probably another 1,500 to 2,000 easily still up in the trees that have actually deceased, and we need some wind to knock them down, and they're going to be dropping everywhere.
So, Sue,
it's pretty horrid.
At the risk of being gruesome, are they literally just dropping out of the trees through heat exhaustion, dehydration? Are they dead before they hit the ground, or what?
A lot of them are dead before they hit the ground. If you can imagine, we were sitting there all set up because we knew this was going to happen. We didn't quite know how severe, but we knew it was going to happen. And we were just sitting there, and all of a sudden there's bats dropping just everywhere. And literally we could not pick them up quick enough. They were everywhere, just all over the ground. They were. The Botanic Gardens were fantastic and put the sprinklers on for us for the bats.
So you're trying to dampen them down? Is that what you're doing, to cool them down?
Yeah. We spray them. We've got some sprayers for those that haven't come quite down low enough for us to reach. We've got some pretty high sprayers, and the Botanics also ran the sprinkler system. But even with that, and the 46-degree heat, of course, it was just wasn't enough. So we lost a heck of a lot of bats, unfortunately.
So do you know, when we get hot, humans sweat. Do bats have a cooling system, or how do they cope with the heat?
They don't really have a cooling system, but they'll lick their wrists. And they do what we call wing fanning. If you ever walk under a colony on a warm day, you'll see them gently fanning themselves with their wings. That's how they try and cool themselves down. But as you can imagine, in 46 degrees, nothing's going to help. Nothing at all.
Has anything like this happened before at this scale?
Not in Adelaide. No. The most we'd lost in 1 year was 600. But interstate, Queensland and New South Wales. I think they recently had an event with the spectacle flying foxes where they actually lost a quarter of the whole species, sort of thing.
But you're talking thousands
they're
here.
Endangered species.
You're talking thousands here, and this is what they're listed as a vulnerable species, aren't they?
That's correct. Yes.
So this is pretty bad for them.
It's very bad for them. Their numbers are dwindling. A lot of people think they're a pest because they all live together, and it looks like there's so many of them. But yeah, there's not, and
it's not just
flying foxes. You're going to start seeing our forests dying off. You won't get that regeneration of your forests and that type of thing.
Yeah, explain that to people. What role do they play in the ecosystem? What's their job?
Well, they eat the native fruits and they disperse the seeds through their feces, and they're nectar feeders. So they also take the pollen with them, and when they get that on their faces, and then they go to the next tree, and so they're pollinators as well.
So, Sue, are you getting little orphaned bats or what?
Most of the bats we're getting in around about what we call the juvenile stage. So they'd still be with mum and feeding milk from mum, but they're almost ready to start coming off mum.
So what do? Do you have to hand rear them from there for a little bit, or what?
What we do is we've had some in that are really little that we're hand rearing, but we've only had about 4 that are fully dependent on milk. The others are on what we call a 10-day plan to get them feeding on fruit. But at the moment, I've got about 50 bats in my house that I'm trying to get to feed.
Oh dear, that sounds like an interesting scenario. So is this situation going to push them into being endangered, or how bad is it?
Well, I mean, give it another few years, and the climate's getting hotter. We could see our flying foxes die out over the years very easily if people don't start understanding them as a species and understanding the importance that they have to the environment.
And so, do you collect up the carcasses as well? Is that an important part of it? Do you collect them up?
We do normally when there's a heat stress, but we're not talking this number. We're only talking 100 or 200 bats. So we are relying on the botanic staff, the Adelaide City Council staff. They've had a lot of their staff vaccinated so they can handle the dead bats. I think this morning we collected about 30 dead bodies, and so it's just something we do. This has been a real first for us. So we were expecting the worst and we got the worst.
And that's Sue Westover in South Australia. Do check out that story. It will be online on our Facebook page and our website. There's some cute little pictures of the bats, and just a reminder, the photos aren't upside down. I think they're sweet. Other people in the office think they look like flying rats. I'd be interested to know what you reckon. The police are investigating after a woman was knocked out by a punch to the head in Manukau over the weekend. Videos of the fight have been posted on social media. Tom Furley reports.
The video, posted on Facebook and now reposted by other accounts, shows a man in a red hat swing at a woman before another woman steps in. He swings again, hitting the second woman in the side of the head. She falls to the ground and stays there.
Oh, just how much of a coward the guy is, really. It should not have happened. Whatever the circumstances are, looking at the video, it's just shocking.
That's local ward councillor Al Filipaina. He says it's unusual for violence to erupt in that spot. The police have confirmed they were called to the fight in the McDonald's car park in the early hours of Saturday morning. They say the woman was taken to Middlemore Hospital in a moderate condition. Around the area today, many locals said they'd seen the video, including one man, Chris.
Yeah, pretty cowardly. Yeah, real bad. It's the local bars just up the road, which are pretty nice, pretty good. So yeah, it's a bit of a shame that's happened. Hope they get someone.
Harry and Emma live just down the road.
It does make you more aware of what's going on around you. Like you start looking around more and see who's around you. Like
that's why I don't like going outside at night time.
Yeah, and you do question your safety sometimes.
Emma says it's a popular spot.
That McDonald's in particular is very busy. It's always busy. The drive-thru's always out of the drive, like always. right out the drive-through, and there's always heaps of people in there, and especially on like Friday and Saturday nights as well.
Filipina says fortunately it's a well-lit place, but he's disappointed nobody stepped in to stop the fight.
You know, the community should know that it is a safe place. But I think more importantly is to tell people, look, if they see something building up like this, is to separate the parties. Simple as that. Just separate them. Let them go on their way, you know, instead of just watching.
The police say they spoke with people at the scene and their inquiries are continuing. For Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
The pressure of having to look after an influx of tourists is leaving some rural practices without a GP for hours on end. In an emergency, doctors have to abandon the patients at their practices to go out to help. And they're worried that will happen more often as tourist numbers increase and they won't have any extra support. Our tourism reporter Tess Brunton reports.
Nestled near Aoraki Mount Cook in the Mackenzie district is a rural town of Twizel. It has a population of less than 1,500 people, but it swells dramatically during the summer months as tourists descend. Rural General Practice Network Chief Executive Dalton Kelly says in an emergency, the doctor may have to go out with an ambulance or by themselves.
What that means is that the people who normally would be going to see the doctor in the practice or the nurse, they won't have access to that person. They may sit there for 5 or 6 hours not able to see their GP. But the tourist will be well looked after in bad circumstances.
He says at the height of the tourist season, a rural doctor or nurse can undertake up to 6 air ambulance call-outs in a single day. Staffing remains an issue for many rural practices, with Mr Kelly saying a quarter of all rural practices are trying to hire a GP. He welcomes regional development funding for tourism infrastructure, but says medical services shouldn't be forgotten.
People coming here for a holiday, they will be more concerned or will want to know that there is a health service that can deliver what they might require if they have an emergency while they're enjoying New Zealand in a rural setting. So I think health service is more important than car parking and toilets.
He's called on the government to offer additional funding, ideally between 2 to 3 million more, to support rural practices. Tim Malloy is a doctor based out of Wellsford, Auckland's northernmost town. In summer, the town's population swells by 30,000. Dr Malloy says doctors avoid taking holidays during the busy summer period to keep up with demand.
We are recruiting internationally for health providers, targeting the summer months to ensure that our workforce is at its strength for the demand that the summer represents to us.
The Ministry of Health's Community and Ambulance Manager, Andrew Ender, says the government requires district health boards to respond to the changing demands of their communities. He says St John also prepares for the influx of more visitors during the year.
We see them putting additional services in place in Central Otago during the ski season, into places like Twizel during the summer season. And they also respond to other national challenges like New Year's.
In a statement, Tourism Industry Aotearoa Chief Executive Chris Roberts says GPs receive more income if the patient demand is increasing, and the normal response is to provide more services. He says it's an issue of attracting staff, not visitor arrivals. Mr Roberts says most visitors to New Zealand have travel insurance and are charged for any medical services they receive. For Checkpoint, Tess Brunton, tēnei.
It is almost 23 after 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Aid workers based in Vanuatu say disaster could strike if a cyclone hits people already displaced by Umbai's volcanic eruptions. More than 10,000 residents were evacuated last year when the island was blanketed in ash. Although hundreds have since returned despite warnings the volcano is unstable. Mackenzie Smith has more.
Aid workers training in New Zealand paint a grim picture of resettlement camps in Santor Island, where most of Umbai's former residents were forced to flee in August. Flimsy and leaky tents made using materials already weathered from 2015's Cyclone Pam house thousands, reflecting the struggles of an under-resourced National Disaster Management Office. Kevin Kapalu from World Vision Vanuatu says thousands of evacuees remaining on Santor are already suffering because of heavy rainfall.
If there's a big amount of rainfall, then the tents will actually get flooded and they would be up all night, and the beddings, the stuffs, the clothes would actually be wet.
But with another 3 months of the South Pacific cyclone season to go, Mr. Kapalu says the evacuees are at serious risk.
It will be another challenge if there's another cyclone within this cyclone period. Then that will add another disasters on top, so they will become more vulnerable.
Mr. Kapalu says over the past few months, around 2,000 people have returned home to Ambai, ignoring official advice at the time not to. Earlier this month, the government finally gave the green light, backing a plan to support the safe return of residents. However, many have already established new lives on other islands, including Santor, where some have bought new land but have no money to build on it. Mr. Kapalu says nearly 6 months after the mass evacuations, Ambaians are still feeling vulnerable and stressed out.
Just imagine standing in a pool of water inside your house whole night. How will you feel? Will that be comfortable to you?
Another World Vision Vanuatu worker, Joanna Halili, says many evacuation shelters in Santor are increasingly overcrowded.
We have extra people coming in, and it's quite a stress to the family, because we have another 10 people on top of another 5, then it will be 10, and there will be only 2 people having job, then using only 1 toilet.
Meanwhile, hundreds of people on nearby Umbrim Island are being relocated and may have to be moved off island because of eruptions from 2 volcanoes there. For Checkpoint, Call Mackenzie Smith, tēnei.
Now, returning to our conversation about the length of the summer school holidays and if we should shorten those holidays, some more of your feedback. Sarah says, I think employers need to provide more flexible working arrangements for parents. Many jobs have aspects that could be done from home these days, and work from home options, a few days a week or shorter hours or more flexible hours, she says. I would prefer 2 weeks off for Christmas holidays and then another long summer holiday or 4 or 5 weeks in late January or February to split it up. John says 2 parents with 8 weeks annual leave does not fit well with 12 weeks of school holidays. For us, this time of year is a constant struggle to sort out our leave, if we have any, he says, manage the budget and on figuring out how much leave without pay we can take to cover things. Have no idea how those in other occupations manage, especially when school holiday programs cost so much, he says. $50 a day per child in Palmy. That from John. Francis says, I understand that schools are not childcare, but I think that the schedule of school holidays reflects a time when only 1 parent worked. Well, our video journalist, Rebecca Parsons-King, asked Wellington caregivers if the summer holidays are too long.
My child's only 2, but it's definitely something that I do think about for the future, that I don't know really what I will do childcare wise, especially with I'm a shift worker, so that will probably be really difficult for me. So yeah, they probably are a little bit too long, but also the kids also need a good break, so it's a fine balance, I think. Yeah. Beg a parent from the UK to come over and have the kids. Or hopefully find I don't know, maybe an au pair or something like that for that period of time, or school holiday programs. But again, they wouldn't really fit in with the kind of work that I do. So whether I do a bit of a child swap with somebody else's, friends' kids, I've got a couple of friends who've got kids at the same age as me, so we could maybe share a couple of days or something. But that'd be a lot of kids to have. So yeah, but that would just be something that I'd have to think about when the time came, for sure.
Yeah, I do. So my daughter's been off, I think it's a total of 7 weeks. So we're lucky that we've got grandparents to help, but as parents we can't take the whole time off. So if I had to pay for childcare, it would be really expensive. One of her grandmothers is a teacher and one's self-employed, so between the 2 of them, I'm pretty lucky. But if we didn't have them, I think it would be a lot harder.
You don't think they're too long? No, they're about the right length, I think, in summer. It's good. I think good time for families to get together after Christmas. Whole of January you can just chill out and do things like we just been to Mateo Soames Island. Good time for grandparents to spend time with kids, and yeah, it's good, eh? So luckily the daughter-in-laws don't work, so they basically take care of the kids. Poor old husbands or fathers have to go off to work though.
The Christmas holidays get a bit long, they get a bit bored by the end coming up, but in general I suppose. I'm a bit on the fence about that one. Over the years I've had family that have been supportive, so when the kids were little, if I was working, I was able to have grandparents especially, which have been great, or when I was studying I put them into holiday programs while I was studying, which was subsidised by the government, so that was really helpful as well.
And we've had an overwhelming amount of feedback on that story about whether we should shorten the school holidays. Sorry, we haven't been able to get to it all today. That is Checkpoint for this evening. Thank you so much for joining us on your radio, television, online, or however you chose to connect with us today. It's great to catch up with you. You can look back at some of our stories tonight on rnz.co.nz/checkpoint or on our Facebook page. We'll catch you tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The State Services Commissioner is siding with the Housing Ministry in its stoush with former KiwiBuild head Stephen Barclay, who is taking legal action against the government over his resignation earlier this month. The Rural GP Network wants the government to pitch in with more funding to help cover the burden of tourism on small practices. Toxic algae has closed ponds and waterways in Napier's Anderson Park to dogs, and the council is also warning people to stay away. And experts from 14 countries have appealed for a global treaty to defeat the pandemics of obesity, hunger and climate change. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather will be at 7.
RNZ National, with a fresh take on the day's news at 10 every weeknight with Karen Hay.
She attempted to push you away, but she wasn't able to because you were too forceful.
Including the latest national and international news from the RNZ News team.
It looks like Mr Tamahiri's going